Okay.
Okay, I think we're ready now. Here we go. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Hasidut. We are continuing our series on Maaseh Merkavah, the workings of the Chariot. I believe this is our 5th class. A very, very quick review is the first 3 classes, we laid the foundation of understanding who Ezekiel is. What are we talking about with the idea of the workings of the chariot? And we went through the first 5 verses. We really delved into the meaning of almost every word. And we spent a lot of time discussing what most people consider the most important word in the vision of Ezekiel, and that is chashmal, the energy called chashmal. And we delved into the idea of paradox, because chashmal represents, chash is silence, mal is speaking. And then last week, we read from the 5th verse to the 15th verse. And we identified 3 areas to really focus on. I should mention the whole vision is only 28 verses. Later, once we get through the first chapter of Ezekiel, then chapters 2 through 9 are discussions between God and Ezekiel. God is instructing Ezekiel. But in chapter 10, he returns to his vision. And so once we get through the first chapter, we will be then turning to the 10th chapter. And that is the whole text for what we call Maaseh Merkavah. So last week, we identified 3 themes. One is the fact that Yechezkel sees angels that he calls Chariot. That we're going to discuss next week. Who are these angels? What do they represent? All of the symbolism that goes with it. And at the end of the 15th verse, it says that these angels were ratso v'shov, running and returning. This is a major concept in Kabbalah and Hasidut. It's brought all over the place. And this is the source for this concept. So we're going to be delving into that. But last week, we took the third and perhaps the most famous of all of the different images of the workings of the chariot. And that is Yechezkel sees 4 angels, and they each had 4 faces, and they each had 4 wings. And so last week, we began to discuss the meaning of the number 4, because the whole idea of Maaseh Merkavah, it can be understood on many different levels. One of the levels that we've discussed, especially from Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, is that he is describing a meditative practice and how to enter into the meditative practice. And what Yechezkel is seeing, though, is unique to him. we've discussed this, that he is not the only one who has this experience called the workings of the chariot. We already identified that Daniel, Zechariah, and Isaiah, and even Moshe Rabbeinu, all had this experience, which is called the workings of the chariot. This is a mystical elevation of soul to not just the upper worlds, but even more important is, how does this world work? What are the principles? What is the framework? What is the fabric of the physical and spiritual worlds? That is what Maseh Merkavah is about. And that's why we began last week discussing the number 4. And this whole rest of this class is going to be dedicated to understanding the significance of his seeing 4 angels with 4 faces, with 4 wings. We learned already last week that depending on the opinion, but we use the idea of fractals and enclosement, that the way that the commentaries read these verses, which are not easy to understand by any means, but they understand that each of the 4 faces had 4 faces. And most commentaries say, and those 4 faces had 4 faces. One of the opinions we brought last week was it was 4 to the 4th power, 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, 256. That even though when you read the text, it sounds like 4 faces with 4 wings. But when you delve in to the actual words in the verses, they understood that he was getting deeper and deeper and deeper into this vision. And he was seeing deeper levels of reality. If you remember last week, we discussed how this idea of that what you see in the smallest components of an atom looks exactly the same as if you were out using the Webb telescope and seeing galaxies with millions of light years between them, that all of the different levels of reality, from outer space to inner space, are all connected. And that is what is being described here by Yechezkel, that 4 within 4 within 4 within 4. And that's where we left off. And so one of the things we did last week is we quoted from Rav Ginsburg's book on the Hebrew letters, where he explains the symbolism of the number 4 in the physical material world, on the level of the soul, and from God's perspective, a divine perspective. And we went through a whole list of 4s in the physical world, and we saw from the 4 seasons to the 4 elements to the 4 forces of modern physics to the directions, the 4 directions, the way we discuss inanimate, vegetative, animal, and human. The way we describe this world is very much in sets of 4: fire, earth, air, and water, and a long list. And we saw also in Jewish tradition how the number 4 repeats itself in so many different Jewish traditions and texts. And the most important, this is where we ended the class, the most important one is from the divine perspective, that all of this on the physical level, the soul level, is coming ultimately from the 4 letters of God's essential name. And that's why this verse, Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, I place God before me at all times. On a simple level, that means I try to be aware of God's presence all of the time, surrounded by God's energy and presence and consciousness. But even deeper, Rav Ginsburg teaches that Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid can also mean I see the 4 letters of God's name before me at all times. In other words, all of reality can be understood through the model of the 4 letters of God's name. So now let's move into a new area here. The 4 faces that Yechezkel sees. And first, also, he says he sees angels, but they had the image of a human being. And then later it says that under the wings of the angels were human hands. So we also have this question that we're going to have to deal with in the future of, was he seeing angels or was he seeing humans? And where was the fine line between what he was seeing? But it's clear he was seeing a composite of angel and human. And so in a certain way, we look at the word Adam for human being, Adam. The Aleph represents the soul, the godly component, and the Dam represents the blood, the body, physical and spiritual. So here, in call it modern poetic terms, it's said that a human being is a composite of angel and devil. We don't usually use that kind of terminology, but it's out there in the Western world, that we're a composite of physical and spiritual. But the faces, and in the text, it says very clearly, he sees the image of a lion, an ox, an eagle, and a man. Those are the 4 faces. An ox, a lion, an eagle, and a man. So now let's look at the symbolism here. If we look at the 4 seasons of the year, and we parallel them to the 12 constellations, or the 12 astrological signs. What we see here is these 4 images that Yechezkel sees will be the middle, because if we have 4 seasons and we have 12 months, 12 constellations, 12 astrological signs. So each season is made up of 3 months, 3 astrological signs. So we're going to start with the ox. The ox is the symbol of Taurus, the second month of the year. You have Aries and then Taurus. So it's the middle of the 3. We'll call it the spring months. And the ox in Jewish tradition is always connected to Yosef, because when Jacob is blessing him, he refers to Yosef as an ox. And so here, the first sign is he sees an ox. This is the middle of the spring months, Taurus. Then the lion. The lion is Leo. The lion is the middle of the summer months, which are Tammuz, Av, and Elul. So the middle of the summer months is Leo. And I'm going to go back to the ox. The ox is a earth sign. When you go through the constellations, it's 3 sets of fire, earth, air, water. Repeated 3 times. Fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water. So the first one, the ox, is the earth sign. The second, the lion, is the fire sign. Leo, the month of Av, is a fire sign. The next one he sees is the eagle. And the eagle, though, is according to tradition, its tail is of a snake. This is Scorpio. Scorpio is the middle of the fall months, which in Hebrew are Tishrei, Cheshvan, and Kislev. Libra, what's the next one? In the astrological, give me a second, Scorpio. And that's why the eagle has a snake tail, like a scorpion. And that is a water sign. And it's the middle of the fall months. And then you have the winter months of Tevet, of Shvat, and Adar. And the middle one is Shvat, which is Aquarius. And Aquarius is always represented by a human being. So just to review this is very, very important to the whole symbolism here. Yechezkel is seeing, first of all, he's seeing fire, earth, air, and water. And he's seeing the images of the middle of the 4 seasons. These are the 4 faces that he's seeing. So this is very, very significant, because here we're again, what Yechezkel is seeing, even though he's describing a vision, but really what he's describing and what's being imparted to him is the way the world works. And so here, the 4 faces are now connected to the 4 seasons, to the 4 elements, to the 4 astrological signs. And in modern science, so then we get into the whole idea of the 4 forces through which all reality is dependent on. The strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity. So here we're trying to get to the essence of what he is seeing, what Maaseh Merkavah is. In a certain way, we mentioned this last week, is Maaseh Bereshit, the workings of creation. So these are the 7 days of creation. And here we get what we're going to call the outside flow of creation, the divine creative process, how everything came into being, cause and effect, mida keneged mida, a measure for a measure. But Maaseh Merkavah is in a certain way the inside story of Maaseh Bereshit, the workings of creation. And that's why we spend so much time on the word chashmal, because as we explained, the essence of this world is duality, plurality, opposites, and ultimately paradox. And that is what Yechezkel is being shown. Remember, back in the first verse, Yechezkel says that he saw visions of God. Well, this is a vision that God is imparting to him. And so really what is being imparted to him is the inner workings of how creation actually works. So that's why this number 4 is so important. Now I'm going to introduce another idea that is extremely important here, because Yechezkel is seeing this composite being, this composite reality of levels of 4. 4 within 4 within 4 within 4. But when we look at Jewish tradition, we're going to see that the model that he's seeing, we see in other places. So I'm going to start almost from the end result, and we're going to work backwards. When we were living in the desert, and it's explained in the book of Bamidbar, in Parshat Bamidbar, it explains how did we camp in the desert. So it goes into great detail that in the middle of the camp is the Mishkan. In the middle of the Mishkan is the Holy of Holies. In the middle of the Holy of Holies is the Holy Ark. And in the Ark is the 2 tablets of the law and the original Torah that Moshe wrote. That's in the middle of the camp. The first camp that camps around it on 3 sides are the families of the 3 sons of the Levites. And on the 4th side is Moshe and Aaron and family. That's the surrounding camp around the tabernacle. And then you had 3 tribes on each of the 4 directions. And the, one second. And this model is considered extremely important. And we're going to see that this was a result. Here's a picture. Wait, hold on. Yeah. Here is a picture of how they camped. So you can see east, west, north, and south. There are 3 tribes. In the middle is the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and it is surrounded by the Levites and the Kohanim. The question is, where did this alignment come from? The Torah spends an enormous amount of time explaining how each direction had 3 tribes and which tribes they were and how they marched in the desert. And all of it was surrounding the Mishkan. That's really, really important. So according to tradition, this model was already revealed before this, where we're told that when Yaakov is on his deathbed, so he called his sons in, he gave them blessings, and it's not in the text, but according to the Midrash, before he died, he instructed them to take him back to Israel for burial. And according to the Midrash, he assigned them to march around his casket in the exact same order as we later camped in the desert. And so they carried his casket as if he was like the tabernacle in the middle. Where did Yaakov get this idea from? So we go back even one further step. And that is when Yaakov has the dream of the ladder. It says that when he laid down that night, he put stones around his head. And we're told by tradition, how did he put those stones? 3 in each direction around him. Because he already saw prophetically that he would have 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes, who would eventually march in the desert in the same model. Now, later, the Zohar says that Yerushalayim, and those of you who have been in Yerushalayim will understand this, that Yerushalayim was built with 3 hills in each direction around it. So those of you who have gone down to the Kotel, you know by looking in different directions how the Temple Mount is surrounded on all sides. The way we see it is kind of like a circle. But what the Zohar says, it's actually, it didn't say hills, it said it is surrounded by 3 stones. But these stones are like hills. And the topography is very much like this. That Yerushalayim is like concentric circles getting bigger and bigger, surrounding the Temple Mount. So you can see there's a theme here. The way we marched in the temple, in the desert, was the Mishkan is in the middle and 3 tribes to each side around it. The way that Yaakov laid down for his dream, he put 12 stones around him, 3 in each direction. Jerusalem is built with the Temple Mount in the middle. So now we'll ask, but where did all of this come from? Where did this inspiration to Yaakov come from? And in the Torah, in Parshat Bamidbar, it says specifically, God commanded them how to march in the desert. It wasn't that Moshe decided this tribe will be on this side and this tribe will be on this side. God says this tribe will be on this side, etc. And now you're going to understand why I'm saying all of this. Because you might ask, well, what does this have to do with Yechezkel? Well, we could already answer because we've been developing this theme that Yechezkel is seeing deeper and deeper stratas of reality and higher stratas of reality. And it seems that the number that is so important here is the number 4. Now we've discussed why it's so important. But what we're told is the original model that this is all coming from, and we're going to see this. We didn't get this part yet in the vision of Yechezkel, but eventually we're going to introduce the idea of the throne of God. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're told that the throne of God, in a sense, represents the middle of creation. And according to tradition, there are camps of angels to the 4 directions around the throne. And just like in the desert, even though there's 3 tribes to each direction, one of the tribes is the most important. And so the 4 that are most important are Yehuda, Ephraim, Reuven, and Dan. But those 4 camps are called by those leaders: Yehuda, Ephraim, Reuven, and Dan. So we're told in heaven, who are the main angels surrounding the throne? Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. These are called the 4 cardinal angels. And just like we have this concept that everything in this world has its counter point, its counter parallel in the higher worlds. So this model that we marched in the desert, that the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is based on, that Yaakov's dream, he's surrounded on all sides, is coming from a higher reality. And that higher reality is what Yechezkel is starting to see. We haven't gotten yet, but he will eventually see the throne of God, just like Isaiah saw the throne of God. And just like the throne of God is mentioned many times in the Chumash and in the rest of the Bible, this concept called the throne of God, surrounded on all 4 sides by angels. And so therefore, Israel was commanded in the desert to be a mirror image of this higher reality. Now, going back to the Temple Mount, so many of you are probably aware that the temple was built on it was called the Even Shtia, the foundation stone. And the Holy of Holies literally was built on this stone. The stone still exists. It's in the mosque now. And the Muslims hold this to be very holy also. And it's called the foundation stone. Many of you have heard that we have a concept that there's a Jerusalem below and a Jerusalem above. There's a temple below and a temple above. So anyone who's familiar with some of the teachings of Plato, so he developed a very similar idea. I have to mention Plato is 1,000 years after the giving of the Torah. Nonetheless, he had this concept very, very similar. As above, so below. That everything in this world had a perfected form in a higher world. Well, this had already been developed in Judaism for even before the giving of the Torah. So the idea is that there is a parallel temple above, and this temple above is almost the same as talking about the throne of God. And so therefore, I'm mentioning all of this is because Yechezkel, by seeing these 4 faces with the 4 wings, and one of the parts that we didn't try to explain is Yechezkel is talking about how this chariot moved. It's very, very difficult to understand, but it appears that it's not static. It's not static. And so the fact that Yechezkel is seeing these four images and four images within images, it's very similar to this model that we're talking about. It's a very, very important connection. Now, just to end this part, I want to go back to the four faces that he's seeing. The lion is really Yehuda, because Yehuda is always compared to a lion. Especially in Yaakov's blessing to Yehuda, he's described as a lion, and even to this day, the symbol of the city of Jerusalem are two lions, because from Yehuda comes David. David is the one who made Jerusalem the capital of Israel, and from David will come Mashiach, and God willing, the rebuilding of the third temple. So the lion here is Yehuda. The ox, as I said, is Yosef. But in the desert, it was Ephraim. Ephraim is the son of Yosef. These are the four main tribes of the four camps. That is what Yechezkel is seeing. The eagle or snake, which we compared to Scorpio, this is Dan. And sure enough, in the blessing that Yaakov gives to Dan, he compares him to a snake. Here it's the eagle snake. And the last one is a little less clear. That's the image of the human being. And according to many, it's Reuven, because he's the fourth main tribe of the encampments. But others say that the face that he was seeing was Yaakov's face. Of course, Reuven is the son of Yaakov. So I'm just pointing this out because we've connected the four faces to the four seasons, to the four elements, to the four to the 12 astrological signs, to the 12 months, the 12 tribes. All of this is part of the symbolism of what Yechezkel is experiencing here. Of course, it's in extremely symbolic terms, but that's what we're trying to do is understand it on a deeper level. Okay, now we're going to continue with the number 4, and it seems that we're going to go into next week as well, because that's how important it is. Remember, the whole vision is 28 verses, and many of them are very difficult to understand. What we're dealing now is kind of like the heart and soul of the vision. Next week, we're going to continue with the number 4, and then we're going to get into who are these angels, these Chariot, and what do they represent. Now, going on with the number 4, we have to understand the significance of the number 4 in general. So as we said, it's all connected to the 4 letters of God's name. It's all coming from that. So in the Zohar, it talks about 4 levels of song: Shir Pashut, Shir Kaful, Shir Mishulash, Shir Mirubah. Mirubah. A simple song, a double song, a triple song, and a quadruple song. What is this referring to? So here is the the image that this idea is based on. And here is the simple song, the double song, the triple song, the quadruple song. But if you count up the dots here, you get the number 10. Now, we know the number 10 is extremely important in everything that has to do with Judaism. We're not even going to go into all of the important tens here. But what we will mention is that the number 4 is intrinsically connected to the number 10. And of course, 10 are the 10 sfirot. And here, look carefully, the shir pashut is keter. The shir kaful is chachma and bina. The shir meshulash is chesed, gevura, tiferet. And the shir merubah is netzach, hod, yesod, and malchut. And so in the number 4, you have implied the number 10. And that's why it's so important. When we take the 4 letters of God's name and we connect them to the sfirot, well, we only have 4 letters of God's name and 10 sfirot. So how is that usually done? The yud is chachma, the hey is bina, the vav are the 6 lower sfirot, and the final hey is malchut. Now, what's interesting is that the final, meaning the last of the 4 letters, is the 10th sfira. So again, the idea that the 4 and the 10 go together very, very much. Now, obviously, the first letter of God's name, 4-letter name, is a yud, which is equal to 10. So here we're just making a connection between 4 and 10. In Ezekiel's vision, the number 10 does not appear explicitly. But implicitly, it's very, very much there. Now, Rav Ginsburg, he has a short piece on the first 10 numbers. And he gives an explanation of the essence of each of the numbers. To the number 4, it's Malchut v'Hanhaga, kingdom and rulership. Now, this sounds, how does the number 4 get that? Because we would usually apply that to the number 10. Why? Number 10 is the 10th sphere of Malchut. And yet Rav Ginsburg is saying that the essence of the number 4 is Malchut. And so every day at the end of Aleinu, when we talk about the future revelation of God, we say, V'hoya Hashem lemelech al kol ha'oretz, v'yom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shemo echad. That in the future, God will be one, and he and his name will be one. And so here, the idea that the Malchut of God, the kingdom of God, is connected to God's name. And that's why we say that. B'yom hahu Yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. God's oneness will be revealed through his name. And here the name, of course, we're talking about the name of 4 letters. But these 4 letters represent God's kingship. And so this applies to Ma'aseh Merkavah, is because, again, eventually, as Yechezkel kind of elevates his consciousness, eventually he gets to a vision of the throne. And that's like, again, it's symbolic. We're not talking about a physical throne, but we're talking about a concept. And who sits on the throne? The king. 100 times a day, we recognize God as King of the universe. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, ruler of the universe, so sovereign of the universe. And so Yechezkel is working through his vision. Now he's going through how this world works. And he will see that eventually it's all coming from God's name of 4 letters. And that God's name of 4 letters is connected to this concept of the throne, of kingship. And again, that's why the last of the Sefirot is called Malchut. That's where everything gets played out. It's the stage on which reality gets played out. So another way we could see it is when we say the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God, our God, God is one. And it's actually in the halacha. What are we supposed to be thinking about when we say that God is one? Okay, for those who have my Shema book, so I give like 25 different possibilities of what you could be thinking about. One of them, though, that the rabbis give over is if you take the word echad and you translate the letters into numbers. So Aleph is 1, Chet is 8, and Dalet is 4. And so the sages say a beautiful idea, and many, many people, this is what they think about, that when we say that God is one, that we envision that God is one in the heavens. But by our declaring God one, we draw God down through the 7 heavens to the earth. 7 heavens and the earth equals 8. And we draw God's oneness, God's energy, God's light into this world. And then we want to spread it to the 4 directions. That is the Dalet, 4. Now this sounds somewhat Kabbalistic, but it's interesting that this is considered one of the most basic intentions to have when we say that God is one. Again, God is Aleph. God is one in the upper worlds. But we want to draw God into this world, God's presence. And we learn that God also wants to be drawn into this world. That God had a desire to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. That, by the way, is the symbolism of the temple. the Mishkan, the tabernacle. That's what it represents, is our task of making a place for God in this world and ultimately in our hearts and souls and minds. That is what God desires. He desires a relationship where he will be drawn into this world. So we have God, as it were, in the upper worlds, and then we draw God down through the seven heavens to the earth. Again, 7 and 1 is 8, the chet. And then the 4, the dalet, is we should spread it to the 4 corners of the world. And that's why I brought this, because here we see that the final letter that represents God's oneness is the letter dalet, which equals 4. And so, again, to apply it to Ma'aseh Merkavah, we see that Yechezkel is, again, he's seeing and experiencing things on many, many different levels simultaneously. And so here he is seeing visions of God, of one God, but he's seeing it through the filter of God's name and how that manifests in many different ways in this world. Okay, I'm going to end with this. I'll call it a teaser that we've made this claim that when we talk about Maseh Merkavah, we're not talking exclusively about this one vision that Yechezkel has. Maseh Merkavah is a term for deep, mystical, Kabbalistic, Jewish elevation of soul through mystical meditation. And as we've said, different prophets described it in different ways. This is Yechezkel's experience. He's an individual. He's a unique individual. And this is how he is experiencing this meditation, that he will get close to God. But we also said that Isaiah describes his vision, Zechariah describes his vision, and Daniel describes his vision. So I just want to end with this, and we will go into this in greater detail. But when you look in, and people can do your own homework, when you go to the 2nd and 6th chapters of Zechariah, so you'll see that in chapter 2, Zechariah had many visions, and Daniel, and they're absolutely fascinating. But in chapter 2, he describes his vision of 4 horns. And then he sees 4 craftsmen. I'm not going to go any deeper into it. I'm only bringing it to show the significance of 4. It's not just Ezekiel who's being shown visions with the number 4. Then in chapter 6, and this is interesting because we've mentioned this many times, that in Ezekiel's vision, the word chariot is never mentioned. Merkavah is never mentioned. But in the 6th chapter of Zechariah, he describes seeing 4 chariots, Merkavot, 4 chariots with horses of 4 colors, and then describes 4 winds that enter into his vision. When you go to the book of Daniel, In chapter 7, probably the most famous chapter of the book of Daniel, also, he has one vision after another. He is constantly having visions and dreams. And in chapter 7, he describes 4 beasts. We'll go into this. This is very, very significant. These 4 beasts. So I'm only mentioning this because we're ending a class all about the number 4. And we're seeing because Maaseh Merkavah is how everything works, just like a science. If you would ask, like, getting down to the basics, what makes this whole world work? So they'll say, well, there are 4 forces. And we're trying to unite these 4 forces because just like we know that God is one, all of science understands that all of these 4 forces must be united. They know this. And so here, the number 4 is because that is really the bolts and nails of this world, is how we experience this world. We're going to learn more about the number 4 next week. And then we are going to go into the Chariot, these living beings who make such a major part of his vision, because throughout his vision, he's describing these Chariot. And we need to understand who they are and what they mean to us.